Hey, yeah, here we go. That was supposed to be funny. Here we go with our look at a couple of the senses that relate to special or sensory biology. Let's recall what we mean when we say special. It's not special as in really cool or special as in different. Special here refers to the fact that we have these senses that are concentrated. And we talked about in a previous video senses being generalized or special. Special refers to concentrated receptors in one location as opposed to general receptors which are all over the body. So we're going to look at two of our senses here, and we're going to look at two forms of chemoreception, olfaction as well as gustatory. So when we're talking about olfaction, smell, and chemoreception refers to the fact that we're going to have specialized receptors, in this case, that detect odorants, that detect these chemicals or molecules in the air that bind to some of our receptors that are related to our olfactory system. Here's what happens. When we inhale air and it enters our nasal cavity, at the superior end of our nasal cavity, we're going to have this olfactory epithelial region. And you see here it's going to have mucus with then dangling olfactory cilia that are connected to dendrites, that are connected to the olfactory nerve cell, which are connected to the axon. So here's what happens. An odorant, when things enter your nose, will move into this region, dissolve in this mucus, and then depending upon its shape, it's going to bind to, if it has the right shape, it will bind to a particular olfactory cilia, which then will trigger the receptor potential. If you get the right shaped block into the right shaped hole, essentially on the end of these cilia, you get a reaction. A signal will then travel from the dendrite through the cell body and axon, and eventually it's going to pass through the hole, a hole in the ethmoid plate, and then enter the olfactory bulb. The bulb is going to be passing its signal to the olfactory tract and eventually to olfactory cranial nerve number 1. So you have to have the right shape for a molecule to bind to the right receptor. I'll point this out because this is a little bit different than you typically see with lots of receptor cells. Because receptor cells are modified nerve cells, most of the time we do not regenerate nerve cells too often. However, the olfactory stem cells, that are really not showing you those well here in this region, actually can regenerate and replace some of these olfactory receptor cells. Kind of makes sense why. How many times a minute do you breathe? You have a lot of air going in and out that could potentially damage these cilia, so you have to regenerate them. So they're kind of an exception where, because of their wear and tear, we tend to regenerate these receptor cells more often than most. So we have about, depending on who you talk to, anywhere from 400 to 1,000 receptors. We know there's about 400 smell genes that are active only in the nose, and those seem to make those cilia that dangle down. But there is some conversation that we can detect up to 10,000 smells. Actually, that's not true. We may be able to detect billions of smells. There was a new study that was done in 2014 which suggests that we can detect a lot more smells than we originally thought. But once again, if we only have, let's say, 400 genes or even 1,000 receptors, how can we detect thousands or millions or billions of different smells? Well, this is Dr. Linda Buck. That's this one right here. She is a Harvard biologist, and she discovered that there is a coding system that our receptors use and that our brain interprets for us to understand smells. For example, let's say we have 3 receptors, A, B, and C. Let's say that a molecule, an odorant, goes up into our nose and it only activates A. That might mean if B and C are not activated, that the brain interprets that sensation as rose. But if receptors A and B are stimulated, maybe that was received or perceived as lime. All 3 of them, lemon. 2 of the 3, apple. These 2, peach. I just made these up. It's more complicated than that. But you can see already with only 3 receptors, we can distinguish 5 different smells. So this is just a way for us to kind of understand that perhaps there's a coding system that goes into our detection of smell, so we can detect a lot more smells than we actually have receptors to staff that. So just to kind of close with the olfactory, I just want to mention a few things to you. The olfactory system has what's called low threshold and high adaptability. What's that mean? It means it takes really very little of an odorant to trigger some kind of nerve impulse that we perceive as a smell. That's the low threshold. It means that just a few molecules in a room full of air may be enough for you to go, I think I smell something. So that's what the low threshold is. High adaptability is kind of the other side of that. It means that once you detect it, that you tend to pretty quickly adapt to that smell, and you really stop paying attention to that signal, even though there can be ongoing sensation. Think about when you walk into a house and someone's baking a pie. You smell immediately that pie when you walk in, but after a few minutes you may not be as aware of that smell anymore. And again, it sort of makes sense. The olfactory sense is trying to protect us from danger. And if you can simply only smell apple pie, you may not smell it burning in the stove if you could not actually basically tune out the apple pie and tune into a new sensation. This actually is sort of a useful thing for us because of its low threshold, that we use methyl mercaptan as an important ingredient in some of our products. Methyl mercaptan has a stinky kind of rotten cabbage smell, and we actually use this in a few products, like in particular in natural gas. Natural gas normally has no odor, and because it has no odor, if you had a natural gas leak, you would not be able to smell and detect it. However, we intentionally infuse natural gas with methyl mercaptan because, again, we're very, very sensitive to this chemical. And so if we smell that, then we know there's a problem. Hyposmia is a case where you actually have a lack of smell, or you don't smell things very well. And sometimes as we age, some people develop some level of hyposmia, which they just things don't smell the same way as they used to, or they have a lower threshold, a higher threshold, and therefore they really can't smell things as well. I just want to point out a couple of fun things to you. We do have some products, here's one of them called Realm, that says it contains human pheromones. You're probably familiar with pheromones as chemicals that animals use to attract each other. Realm here, for men, believes that they have put in human pheromones into this product so that if you're a guy and you put this on here, that girls are just going to not be able to control themselves and just jump at you because you're wearing this. We do not have stereotypical smell responses. Yes, a human might be able to detect a pheromone in the air, but she's not going to just instantly forget what she's doing and just jump on the guy because she smells this. Some animals do use pheromones to attract mates, but the fact they're putting this in here to try to suggest that females, I'm sorry, used to have no self-control if a guy is wearing this, is a bit overblown. We can, though, put in smells that we know do influence behavior to some degree. This magic tree, I'm sure you've seen these air fresheners people hang on their rear view mirrors. Yeah, it smells kind of like new car smell. And why do people do that? Well, of course, if you are selling a used car and the person slides in there and they smell the new car smell, they go, wow, this car is actually pretty good. Never mind that it has no dashboard or steering wheel or it's missing its wheels. You kind of think it's because it smells that way, it actually will influence your thinking to some degree. There are some stores, I think there's one called World Bazaar, or maybe it's not around anymore, I don't know. But there was a store that for a while had little misters, not little guys, like little spray misters, in the back of their store, and it would spray a very, very pleasant chemical. They actually had researched this chemical and found people stay in the stores like 20% longer if they had these misters on than if they didn't. If they're going to stay in the store 20% longer, what might they do? Buy more stuff. So there is something to be said for the possibility that you can influence some behavior, even though smell is not stereotypical for us and we don't do an instant response. It may slightly, on a subconscious level, influence our thinking. Okay, and I want to do one more sense for you quickly here that deals with chemoreception, and that's gustation. Gustation is the sense of taste. Clearly we're talking here about your tongue, and when you look at the tongue here, you see that there's these different kinds of bumps on it called papillae. You see folate papillae and fungiform papillae, and then you even see this other kind here called circumvallate papillae. I'm not going to hold you responsible for what all these different things do. Some of these papillae actually have embedded within them taste buds. Let's be clear. The taste bud is not here. The rough part of your tongue is not a taste bud. People seem to think that. The taste buds are actually kind of down in these grooves, as you see here. They're down in the grooves, and what happens is once you put something in your mouth and you chew on it and you put some saliva on it, then the molecules from your food will move into these grooves and will stimulate the taste buds depending upon what chemicals are in it. So here's even a better view of it. You see we have these taste pores. So a chemical, you're chewing on a carrot or whatever it is, you're going to have some of the chemicals, some of the molecules, once you have broken them down, will move into here, and here you have these exposed taste fibers. These taste fibers are then going to be triggered by particular chemicals and then shoot a receptor potential afferently toward the brain. Here's just a little different view of this that shows you the papillae rather in a little bit bigger picture. I will point out that a lot of the folate papillae are actually more like speed bumps. They kind of help, or like little Velcro strips. They kind of help pull food toward the posterior portion of the mouth. They really are not going to have necessarily on them any taste buds. You do see here, we won't talk about them right now, but you see the palate and the lingual tonsils. Tonsils are most associated with some protective responses. White blood cells hang out in them, and we'll talk about them more in A&P2. But the receptor organs are the taste buds, and again, there's about 10,000 of them associated with the tongue. You see here on the tops of the fusiform papillae and on the side walls of folate and vallate papillae. As I just mentioned, not all folate papillae are going to have taste buds, but a lot of them do. And you do even have some taste buds on the soft palate, the cheeks, the pharynx, and the epiglottis. So even though we think about the tongue as the primary place where we have taste buds, and that's true, you do have some taste buds in some other locations. As you're probably aware, and you probably grew up knowing this, that there's 4 main senses, right? Sweet, sour, salty, and bitter. There's actually been a 5th sense described by some Japanese researchers called umami, which is what it's called as savory or meaty. It's going to have, you see there, amino acids, glutamate and aspartate. It's going to have, again, kind of a meat-esque taste, which is not any of the sweet, sour, salty, or bitter tastes. So it's actually been described as a 5th sense. Briefly here, though, sweet obviously is going to pick up anything with sugars in it. Sour is going to pick up things with hydrogen ions, so something that's acidic is going to be perceived as sour. Salty is going to be things with metal ions, so again, obviously sodium, but even potassium and calcium. And bitter are going to be alkaloids. A lot of plant chemicals like almonds, for example, nicotine, aspirin, have a bitter taste, and that's where we detect those. Unlike what you've probably seen, where you've seen the tongue mapped very precisely with these, that salty is here and sweet's there. For example, actually these, the 5 basic taste bud types are distributed not quite evenly, but pretty randomly across the tongue. And then obviously as each one is stimulated, it will send a signal afferently to the brain, and the brain interprets, I've just got a bunch of salty sensations, or I've just got a bunch of umami sensations, to help you understand what actually you are tasting at that time. So just kind of wrap up here, the physiology of taste. To be tasted, as I mentioned, chemicals have to be dissolved in saliva. They have to enter one of those pores, and they have to contact the appropriate hairs. The hairs are components of the taste buds. Why does this matter, how something tastes? It's not just that you prefer a particular type of food, which is one way that we kind of think about taste buds, but it also helps us guide to think about foods that are helpful or harmful to us. For example, many poisons are going to be very bitter tasting. And some people really like bitter foods. I happen to be one of those. I really like almonds, for example. But some people find almonds really kind of almost offensive because they are very bittery. So if you are out in nature and you bite on a plant and it tastes really, really bad, you will spit it out. That's a value, a protective value of gustation. Think about also, a lot of our medicines have bad taste. We put bad taste in some medicines on purpose so to keep kids from actually trying to consume those recreationally. Now, of course, we will then turn around and make some of our medicines cherry flavored or grape flavored to try to make people take them, because normally those would be medicines that would not be very friendly to take. But I do want to point out also there's a sort of a deeper physiological purpose here. When you start to taste food, that does trigger some of your digestive reflexes. You will begin to increase salivation in your mouth. More salivation means you can coat more food with this greasy substance to facilitate it going down. It actually helps to increase the secretions of your gastric juice in your stomach. So these are some very positive things that we associate with taste that might not necessarily be obvious. And obviously here again, we can associate taste with gagging and reflexive vomiting. If you put something particularly nasty in your mouth, you're going to spit it out, gag, because you don't want it to go down and potentially be harmful. Just to wrap up here then with gustation, there are some other influences, other sensations that influence taste. When we're talking about food tasting a certain way, you may not realize, or perhaps you do, that taste is heavily influenced by our sense of smell. When you are chewing food in your mouth, some of the odorants, some of those molecules will actually travel retronasally. They will go through the back of your pharynx and will actually enter your nasal cavity and trigger your olfactory bulb, and therefore you perceive, as you're chewing something, you perceive the taste and the smell. You think of it collectively as the sense of taste, but in fact about 80% of your taste is smell. And you can appreciate this if you've had a cold and then you eat something. It may taste very bland or very blah because you're not getting that sensation of smell as you're chewing something. And just as a little experiment, if you want to try this is what I've done in class sometimes. Get some Starburst candies, have somebody unwrap one that you don't see what it is, hold your nose and then chew the Starburst and try to tell me what flavor it is. You'll be like, I can do this is easy. Strawberry and lemon and grape and all those taste almost exactly the same until you let go of your nose, and all of a sudden odorants can enter your nose and you can tell the influence of smell on taste. The other major influences are going to be thermoreceptors and mechanoreceptors, and even nociceptors in the mouth can influence taste. Some foods just taste better warm, right? Or taste better cold. And that's because the temperature and texture of the food can actually either enhance the taste or it can distract from the taste. So there's other influences that are on taste besides just those taste buds. Okay. Finally, I also want to mention this because this happens with a lot of people, that there can be some homeostatic imbalances related to our chemical senses. Anosmias are olfactory disorders. That is, people lose their sense of smell. And it can come about from head injuries. This is fairly typical, that someone can have a head injury and then their sense of smell is quite altered. Certain conditions like Parkinson's, some other neurotransmitter disorders that cause brain issues can cause you to lose your sense of smell. And you also see here eusinate fits. This is kind of an interesting one. We mentioned this in class, that some people can actually smell things or hear things. They have these hallucinations or auras that actually precede the epileptic seizure. So why that actually happens, we're not sure, but the sense of olfaction is a pretty basic sense, and so perhaps that's a very protective mechanism that as you're having some brain disruption, the most basic parts of our brain are most affected. Taste problems are less common. You see here again, if someone's having radiation or is taking certain kinds of chemicals or medications or has had head injuries, they may experience a loss of a sense of taste. There are some people who develop what's called taste aversion. they don't want to eat certain foods because they know those foods make them ill. And a lot of time with cancer patients, we have an issue with this because they lose weight and they won't eat very much. It's not really because they just don't want to eat, but food tastes really badly to them, and then they often have reactions, nausea as a result, and they develop a taste aversion because they just don't want to go through the eating bland food and throwing it up. It's understandable. Okay, that wraps up for this video. On to some mastering. Thanks.